Hello and welcome to Reroll. My name is Angus Morrison and today I am bringing you a review of Remember Me, developed by Dontnod Entertainment. I'm sorry, I have no idea how to pronounce that. And published by Capcom. It was released in the US on the 3rd of June, Australia on the 6th, and the EU on the 7th. And this is a new IP, well, as new as any cyberpunk bring-down-the-dystopian-regime IP can really be, which is exciting in itself. As the amnesiac Nilin, equipped with the ability to remix the memories of your targets, you are tasked with recovering your memory, wreaking terrible vengeance, and bringing the corporation overseeing 2084's Neo-Paris to its knees. It's a game which is quite hard to pin down. It's at once a brawler, platformer, and, well, memory editor. We'll go ahead and group that under puzzler, shall we? I'll return to all of these facets later in some detail, but right now alarm bells should be ringing for the folks playing on PC. Brawlers and platformers are traditionally ill-suited to keyboard and mouse control, and Remember Me is no different. It's passable, certainly, but mouse control wreaks a certain amount of havoc with the camera, and overall the experience will be much more enjoyable if you have a 360 controller to hand. For those of you playing on PS3 or 360, you can just look smug and continue as you are. Not too smug, of course, because the enhanced graphical fidelity of the PC version really helps the game out. The graphics menu is slightly limited, perhaps. You won't be seeing the in-depth anti-aliasing controls that were boasted by Tomb Raider, for example. I mean, to the point where I actually had to Google a lot of them. But if you have the capacity to crank everything up to max, you will notice considerable improvement. Improvements even against the trailers that were put out in the run-up to release day. Honestly, I found the gameplay previews to be underwhelming at best. Textures looked murky, models were blocky, and the animations were rather disjointed. Experienced firsthand, however, and the game is at times truly beautiful. It does use the go-to futuristic preset of bold colours, brush steel, and sharp lines, but I personally never tire of it, and it goes further in juxtaposing it with decaying houseman buildings and the dirt and detritus of the urban underbelly. Even when the gameplay tends towards the repetitious, the setting itself is usually something to behold. None of this is particularly unique in itself. In its more overtly futuristic levels, it very much resembles the Mass Effect series. But it is a very coherent aesthetic in which nothing feels out of place and which serves the purposes of the story admirably. The HUD elements, in particular, were the most excited I have ever got over a UI. They are a constant feature of the world thanks to your sense and memory device, drawn for the most part in solid yellows, blues and whites, and just the crispest, cleanest fonts you could hope for. Fonts! This is what has grabbed my attention. Font choice. It just goes to show that the smallest of details can go a very long way in defining the world under construction, and Remember Me's world is one I want to see more of. It's a pity then that Neo-Paris is a very linear, very prescriptive setting. It draws this wonderfully detailed world from the pristine retreats of the rich to bustling slums and expansive sewers, and then it doesn't let you touch any of it. There is only one way through each level, indicated at all times by that beautiful augmented reality HUD, and while you can nip down side passages to grab hidden health and focus upgrades, it's immediately back onto the main path once that business is concluded. It's usually impossible to backtrack too, the specific ledges that were climbable mere moments ago becoming unresponsive once scaled. I'm not saying that Remember Me should have been open world. That's a huge demand to make of any developer, plus this is Dontnod's first independent project, and the story they were trying to spin would have been poorly served by handing the player the reins entirely. But an illusion of openness, a little more to explore, and the ability to trace your own path through a clearly defined level would have really brought the setting to life. This point is directly applicable to the platforming, of which there is a lot. It was a refreshing choice to focus on movement in 3 dimensions when the game so easily could have become a cover shooter, but it is very much an on-rails experience, and that so much of the game is taken up simply clambering about a precisely predetermined path means it begins to grate rather quickly. It's especially frustrating when a ledge looks like it should be climbable, but the game dictates otherwise. Again, a little freedom of choice would have alleviated the fatigue that sets in after a few hours. Remember Me's unique selling point is the ability to remix the memories of your target, to create a new reality for them and so determine a new course for the city. And the process is certainly interesting. You see the original memory play out before you before being required to identify and alter a specific series of details in order to achieve a new outcome. Some of the scenarios you're capable of creating are deeply moving and deeply disturbing in equal measure. Without giving anything away, the final such encounter elicited more emotion in me than any other game in recent memory, barring, of course, BioShock Infinite. The script isn't perfect by any means. The events of the game and the reactions of its characters don't quite match up, but it is remarkably well acted, which is wonderful to see given the importance to the story of a strong lead character. Nilin is played by Kezia Burrows, and again, despite the trailer showing off some of Remember Me's hammier dialogue, within the game there is real skill in the delivery. Nilin is a truly interesting and engaging figure. Neither is she overly sexualized, for which I would like to say thank you to the devs for sticking to their guns on this point, but if you'd like to hear some more about that, I will be doing a video on digital gender politics coming out on the 10th. Subscribe for controversy! But back on point. The memory remixing is thus affecting because you're party not only to the physical battery that is the video game staple, but you are actively recruited in inflicting emotional damage upon your prey, brilliantly realised through the cast's performance. The process itself is somewhat in need of streamlining, and it does rely on a certain trial and error when you fail to immediately grasp the peculiar brand of logic with which the designer put the puzzle together. Equally, it suffers for poor integration with the world as a whole. It's used rather as a plot point than a viable mechanic. Remixing is the game's selling point, and yet it's only utilised on about 4 occasions through the course of the game. There are several scenes which would have benefited from its more liberal application. The extraction of memories, for example, is done with a single button press. One of the earlier levels sees you scale innumerable buildings and fight waves of troops simply to press B at your target and go on your way again. Worse still is the reliance on quick time events during the boss fights. The execution of each boss is played out through a series of scripted key presses, something that I find utterly baffling given that remoulding memory is the game's central premise, and the remixing mechanics are already in place. It all seems to me like wasted potential. Had remixing pervaded the world rather more thoroughly, Remember Me could have developed a very distinct identity of its own. But as ever, the focus is placed on the combat, which is a mixed bag actually. In the early levels it's a satisfying brawler which is at once weighty and fluid. The decision to allow dodges to interrupt whatever animation is in progress was especially sensible, given that in large groups it can be difficult to get off more than a couple of hits without having to dive out of the way. The combos can be altered on the fly and tailored to each situation without being needlessly complicated, and the introduction of the spammer ranged weapon a few chapters in brings a certain dynamism to the table. S-Presence, meanwhile, are special moves suited to specific tasks such as one-on-one mauling, stealth kills, or robotic enemies. It's not enough to stop the combat becoming stale after a few hours, however. The issue is most pronounced in the boss fights, which reliably require you to juggle crowd control with focused assault. Once the boss has been rendered vulnerable with the necessary special, that move is then on cooldown for a significant period of time before you can renew your attack. And this is part of the mechanics. There is a class of attack tasked specifically with bringing these cooldowns down. But the infinite waves of minor foes summoned throughout the fight can become so unwieldy that it's difficult to fire off the necessary combo to make a meaningful impact on the wait time. As a consequence, these battles will frequently be taken up cartwheeling about the room, killing time until the right special becomes available again. But the same problem is apparent when fighting mechs. They are only damaged by your ranged weapon, which necessitates some thumb twiddling when it needs to recharge. When the player is given the space to chain meaningful combos, the combat is enjoyable, but it's never too far from frustrating. I'll level the same criticism at combat as I did with the memory remixing. It struggles to exist harmoniously with the game as a whole. The combat is clearly delineated from both story and journey, taking place in what are effectively enclosed arenas. After the first few scuffles, you will quickly begin to spot the open spaces where you will be subtly ambushed. It doesn't feel as if you're embarking on a quest of which battling twisted monstrosities is a necessary and integral part, rather that you are embarking on a quest and, oh, by the way, fight! but I'm still not sure how I feel about the game as a whole. It is a game made up of good but disparate ideas which haven't been fitted together comfortably. Both the combat and the memory remixing are full of promise, and with polish and greater concern for their place in a single coherent world, they could have been truly admirable. As it is, they satisfy and frustrate in turn, superficial plot devices which never quite fulfill their potential. Aesthetically, the 2084 Neo-Paris setting is a joy, mixing bright neon and dank filth with gay abandon, and brought to life by a lead character who is at once funny, intriguing, and somewhat tragic. But the world feels claustrophobic, so linear that you can feel the walls closing about you as you're funneled up ledges and drain pipes. So Remember Me is passable where it could have been great, but I will recommend it if only so you can bear witness to its undeniable promise. The game itself was lacking, but these are issues which I would be very excited to see addressed in a sequel.